For me, travel is everything. It's important because it is the bridge to other people. It's the bridge to humanity. You're not going to learn much if you're just chilling in your same 10-mile radius.
Hello, travelers. Welcome to this episode of the Travel with Meaning podcast. I'm your host, Mike Scheibel. This episode is with an amazing filmmaker and storyteller that I've had the pleasure of knowing since childhood, Danny Lee. We talk about all things past, present, and future in Danny's life, from his inspiring show, The Expressway with Dulé Hill, which is available on PBS, his love of 90s hip-hop and rap, his time living in New York, where he made a documentary about the Brooklyn Nets, and he found true love. Plus, so much more. It all happens now on this episode of the Travel with Meaning podcast. Hey, travelers, as I mentioned in this open, I'm joined here by storyteller, filmmaker, documentarian, all around just amazing, visionary, and creative Mr. Danny Lee. What's up, dude?
What's up, man? I appreciate that.
Yeah.
It's hard to hear things like that, but
Get that. And this is an interesting conversation. We've been kind of chatting already pre-podcast about, and we go back. So this is a wonderful kind of comfort level in this conversation. As I mentioned in our open, I've known you 30 plus years, from end of junior high into high school, lived up the street from me. But from a professional standpoint, I've just admired and loved watching you lean into what you love in the story making side, as a storytelling side, I should say, as someone who's been a fan of hip hop music, street art, sneakerhead, and watching you take your passions and curiosity and turn that into a thriving career. So we're going to jump around and talk about and unpack a few little things here and there. But I guess I want to talk about first where you are in this exact moment in this incredible project with Dulé Hill, which is on PBS, The Expressway.
The Expressway with Dulé Hill is, on the surface, it almost appears like a travel show, right? Like a celebrity experiment, a celebrity parachuting into a world and showing up for a couple hours and going back home to their Four Seasons hotel room. But it's actually the inverse of that. Dulé, if you don't know, he played Charlie Young in The West Wing. He was nominated for an Emmy, and he was a pioneer in network television. I mean, he was one of the first few Black actors following The Cosby Show, which just presented African Americans as people. They weren't stereotypes. They weren't connected to a certain class. This character could have been white, Black, Asian, anyone. So anyways, Dulé, but people don't know that he actually came up as a tap dancer. And an
incredible one at that.
An incredible one. And so, we had a meeting, and my approach with any celebrity or talent is, what are you passionate about? How can we mold something around you? And what he was passionate about was dance and the arts. We looked at that. We sort of opened the aperture and made it about trying to tell these stories of unsung, heroic artists around the country who are using their art in these high stakes, transformative ways. We're not talking anything that's whimsical or too soft or just cute to look at. We're talking about a deaf dancer who can't hear the music but can feel the music, and therefore incorporating ASL into his dance routines and teaching other kids who are adaptive how to dance and feel like they can belong. That's a beautiful story. That's in our opening episode in California. And the reason why we kind of gave it a sort of travel format was because that works for PBS, because, they have member stations. It's a decentralized organization where, Alaska or a station in Boston, or, they'll gravitate towards certain material, which usually is localized. We took this show all around, the marketplace, from Netflix to Disney, and everyone passed on it because, frankly, it's a show about lesser known artists, and it feels pretty hopeful and inspirational. I mean, if you look at what's on TV right now, it's either celebrity or true crime. And no knock to those. I'm interested in those too. But I wanted to find a space where we could tell these stories, because I can relate to that. Like, a lot of us in this room, or even watching this, can probably relate to some degree or another of art, giving them some some healing, some meditation, some catharsis, a way for you to connect with someone who's so very different, but you love this song on this hip hop mixtape. I mean, that's how I connected with so many different people in high school. I remember Khalil Kinsey, our mutual friend, he made me my first mixtape. And I remember hearing all these songs from like Souls of Mischief and Trends of Culture. And I'm like, what is this? And like, when you have that commonality of a song that you love with someone who may live 50 miles away or even 2,000 miles away or across the world. So art has this incredible ability to build community, build these bridges with people. And I wanted to really create a show that encapsulates the magic of art, of the arts. And when I say the arts, I just don't mean the visual arts like someone on a canvas. I mean any form of creative expression. And that ranges from theater to music to all of it.
So let's go back for a second, because I think this show is something that needs to be seen by a lot of artists, aspiring artists, but also I think just curious people in general. And I've enjoyed what I've seen. And I'm curious for you guys, as the filmmaker side of it, you went to interesting places and you met really just extraordinary people who had the passion for what they do. It's not about, I need to be the biggest or best. It's just you love what you do.
Correct.
And that sometimes leads to whatever. I want you to share, because you did go around the country, Texas, a few other places. What really stood out to you as far as just the interesting kind of through line in that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what surprised me, because we went, for instance, we went to the Appalachians, and the minute you even mention that region, we all have a preconception of what that entails, who you might meet. And it's funny, when we first got there, I think we landed and we drove right to Hazard, Kentucky. And if you don't know, that's Dukes of Hazzard. That's where the KKK had a foothold, a stronghold. And our talent, Dulé Hill's black, and he was nervous. I was nervous. And we drove in, and as we got into these stories, we quickly learned that, you can't believe everything you've been told. And so through this journey around the country, man, we just learned how just fundamental the arts are in just healing trauma, and again, creating and building these bridges and catalyzing change.
I'm going to encourage everyone to check out The Expressway, because I think it's a beautiful story. I think even if you're not an artist by trait, you're an artist by just human being and what you take in. And I think, is this all available currently on PBS?
Yeah, so it's called The Expressway with Dulé Hill. Expressway is 2 words, so it's a double entendre. It's the expressway, the way of the artist, the way of creative expression. It's on the PBS app, which is free, so you don't have to pay anything. You can watch it anytime you want.
Let's start to talk about where some of these bigger adventures for you started coming in as you as a storyteller. When was this first time that you think you either went abroad or something that your eyes were open to? I can tell a story through my passion, what I love.
So I grew up in Hancock Park, which is very diverse. I grew up skateboarding on Melrose, went to a school that was equal, like parts Korean, Black, Latino, Jewish. And so that's the reality I knew. And then when I moved to the Palisades, I was one of 3 Asian kids. So I felt othered. I definitely felt tokenized. So I've always been into art. My older brother he indoctrinated me in hip hop. I remember him having like Run DMC, LL Cool J, NWA, even JJ Fad, like Kool and the Gang, just all these tapes and that yellow waterproof boombox. You remember that? And so it's always been in me, but it really crystallized the importance when I, sort of looked around like, wow, I'm like one of very few. And art allowed me to sort of create this commonality with other people. I think that aha moment that I felt I could wed and marry my travels with my storytelling was when I was working at Lionsgate for a couple years, my first gig out of college. I was sick of being in a cubicle the first thing I did, when I quit was I went to Taiwan. My friends had this trip planned. They're like, "You want to come?" And I was like, and they were going to Taiwan. I'm like, "Yeah." And when I went, it was, I'd gone abroad, like just like family trips, vacation type stuff, but I've never been to like a city like Taipei, like on the other end of the world. And that just gave me the bug, the smells, the sights, everything. And I actually documented that whole thing on this little camcorder, which I still have the tapes. And I should probably just put it together. I really should. I have to find it. But it was transformative for me.
Did you see things that like you wanted to come back and tell stories about, or things that really just kind of had this
I
web
mean,
for you?
I've always just wanted to tell stories of things that interest me and that are around me.
Mm.
And naturally, I think I'm going to tell stories of things that are different from me. They always say, write what you know, which I do, but I also want to capture things I don't know, but also surrender myself to its authenticity, not smother it with, my point of view. That's really important for me as a filmmaker. I don't think it's coincidental, but I didn't go into filmmaking and actually in the documentary side so I could travel. It's just sort of a natural aspect of documentary filmmaking. The world is big.
When you look at it and you close your eyes, you said, dang, that impacted my life, my career, in 20 years of doing this now.
Well, you kind of mentioned one of them. I was lucky to have been tapped to direct this series about the Brooklyn Nets moving to Brooklyn from New Jersey. Jay Z was the EP on it. And here's this LA kid being tossed out of a helicopter to figure out this Brooklyn story, right? And it was an interesting because it was at this inflection point where the city had used eminent domain to seize the Atlantic Yards neighborhood to build Barclays, that whole arena. And so we got to meet a lot of the people that were firsthand affected by it. So one, on the surface, it's a pop culture story, but at the core of it, it is a story about this place and people going through rapid change. I mean, I think we captured gentrification happening in real time. There was this really dope market called Decobb Market on Decobb, right near Fort Greene in downtown Brooklyn. And back then, downtown Brooklyn was not what it is now, which it looks like Manhattan. And it's this like outdoor market with shipping containers and little shops in them. And it was so dope. And we shot in there. And then I think like right after the next time I came back, it was a building, it was a Target. And so we were fortunate to capture that moment. But also when I lived in Brooklyn, because I lived there for like 5 months. So that was traveling, an extended travel. I never lived in New York. I only been there once or twice before that. But the second month I was living there, I met my wife, who is my wife now. We were at a bar in Brooklyn called The Woods, which is a meat market. You pay $5, you get a tecate and a tequila shot. And I'm sitting there with my boys, and one of my boys, I can't believe I'm telling this story. Um, but one of my buddies is macking on this one girl. And next to the girl is this friend who's starting to look at her phone, starting to get bored. What does a good wingman do? He disarms the bored one. So I went over to the bored one and we just started talking, and it was a such an earnest conversation. It's like, what do you do? All this. Like, and I wasn't even trying to hit on her. I was just being a gentleman. And all these other dudes were all sloppy and trying to like pull her away, you know. And she's like, no. And then we exchanged contact, but we didn't talk for like 2 weeks. And then one day I roll up to my apartment and my buddy's in front that's dating the other girl now. And he's like, yo, the other girl's been asking about you. And I was like, really? Oh, cool. And I hit her up and we just started dating. And New York's such a romantic place. It's not like LA. We turn in every day and we're just like meeting each other at a different subway station. And it was a romantic New York story.
Hmm.
So I credit the two kids I have now, my marriage, to New York
That's
and
beautiful.
work,
And the Brooklyn Nets.
traveling for work. Yes. Shout out Jay-Z.
Let's go backwards before we go forwards. Again, we talked about growing up here in LA, Hancock Park to the Palisades, this skateboarding kid, this hip hop lover, tagger, graffiti artist fan, go to Santa Barbara for school, right? Right. Go to Santa Barbara. Was that the first time you'd ever like been away, like on your own and that kind of stuff?
Oh yeah.
That any of those kind of moments still stick out to you as like having impact and even
The ones I can remember. Yeah, man. I mean, I'd been going up to Santa Barbara since I was like 14,
Of
visiting my
course.
older brother.
Mm.
He lived up there, and when he was up there, it was, I mean, party central doesn't begin to describe. I think they had like one cop in the
Mm.
whole 1 mile radius of Isla Vista, which is a college town, which is, I think it was it's the densest area west of the Mississippi. And yeah, I've been going up there, and every trip going up there felt like I was going to Mars. It just felt so, and as a teenager, you're like, it's liberating,
Hmm.
and that's what got me excited as a kid, obviously as a knucklehead. But yeah, I went to school there, and it was the first time when I was living up there, just this convergence of different people, Northern California, Southern California, just from everywhere. And yeah, that had a pretty fundamental, a formative effect on me.
I love that you keep bringing up things like the people and these things. And like, again, I have a different connection and relationship to who you are and see this. And I know that's been one of those things that have always piqued your curiosity, people and things. And you've always been such a good dude on every level.
Thanks.
No, for sure. I mean, true story. I mean, I would tell you if you're not, but
I wouldn't be here.
yes, good point. Good point. And you mentioned, okay, so then I take this job at Lionsgate and like, I keep coming up with these incredible projects and things you do. I'm really just kind of fascinated with Danny when he's, let's say you're in Europe somewhere and you're seeing street art, or you're in a club somewhere and you're hearing hip hop and you're doing this. Like, are you in these moments and realizing these things are really part of the through line in your life and your career? Is it like we're moving too fast? We're telling stories. Give me a moment that you're like, I stopped and I said, wow, I'm doing it. I'm living.
I value lifestyle as much as
Mm.
career.
Mm.
It's very easy to get caught up in, God, I need to do this next project. I need to do this. And I'm human. Those thoughts will creep into my head, but I really value synthesizing both into what I consider a quality of life. And yeah, there have been definite moments. Semi recently, when I was directing a film on the tennis legend Stan Smith, and we're walking, we're in Wimbledon, and it's the day before Wimbledon opens, and we're just walking, the main court, and I'm just like, man, I'm in Wimbledon with Stan Smith. Like, this is, and during the pandemic too, like the tail end of it, I just quarantined for 5 days in this hotel doing prison workouts and just losing my mind watching like UK reality TV. And yeah, that was one of those moments. I'm like, man, I'm fortunate. It's cool. And I want to give this experience to other people. So part of what I do as a filmmaker is definitely mentorship, is definitely identifying good talent, good souls, and trying to give them their first shot. Like even on the expressway, there's this young producer, director, shooter named Tiki. He just goes by Tiki. He's like one word like Prince or Madonna. Tiki. And the first time I met him, I got introduced to him through some agency, some producer at an agency, an owner of an agency. And she's like, you got to meet, because I was looking for a digital producer to go with us and capture everything. And by the way, there's a BTS recap that we're about to drop that has the whole journey of the last summer. And he just had such a beautiful soul and just was so motivated. And I was like, yo, just roll with this. Come on, we'll figure it out. We figured out how to get him a camera. And so I think that's really important, and again, it comes back to people, man. And that's something I learned over time. It's water the garden. Make sure you treat people never like currency, but always like everyone's going through something and
Mm.
needs something. Because, man, I'm not going to get into like some ideological rant, but people are going too fast sometimes, and they don't remember that people are people
Mm.
sometimes.
With that also, it's a process, right? And I think in today's world, in the social media, Instagrammable world, everyone thinks it happens immediately,
Hmm.
right? And you and I both know 20 years in the making for you as a filmmaker, and you're just getting warmed up, right? You have so many good things ahead. I love that you look at this mentorship or helping someone who's coming next to say, hey, not only am I going to give you a break, but like, let's go. I want to help you.
It comes from because I didn't have that.
I was going to ask you, okay?
No,
I feel the
no
same
one
way.
gave me that. There were promises, but no one fulfilled it, and that goes back to the sort of hip hop mentality of if you're not going to be given instruments or sounds, you make them. So that's where all that comes from. Pay it forward, which of course, if you don't have that, try to break that pattern.
Let's go to hip hop for a second again, because this is a constant soundtrack of your life on so many levels. Give me that moment, give me that place where you were experiencing something live with an artist. It could be at a show, it could be at a private studio. You're somewhere around the world, you're somewhere around the corner. Which, by the way, for reference, travel doesn't mean going far. Sometimes travel is an inside job. But so for your lens of that experience, what pops to you?
One in particular, I remember I was in San Diego with some of my best friends at the time. We were like 15. We just took the train down. Again, it feels like a different world when you're 15. And we were listening to Freestyle Fellowship, Inner City Griots, probably my favorite hip hop album. One of them, Gangstar, Mass Appeal's up there. But just listening to this album and just feeling transported to a different world, and we were in a different world at the time, and mentally. That was a moment in which I really fell in love with music and hip hop. I mean, I loved it all my life, but that was like, it took it a level deeper. So that I always remember that. There was 3 or 4 of us, and we were just bumping it, and it was like in some random park off Rosecrans in Point Loma. And I always remember it.
I love that you said that as like, because I always say like music, like food, like love it's a universal language, right? And there's certain songs I know for myself that I could hear and I'm immediately transported back to a place, a space, a time, right? And so I literally could watch your little wheels turning on that side as far as like, yeah, that really kind of sat with me for that.
Big time.
Where do you start thinking, I want to tell these stories in a bigger place? Was there anywhere that you were traveling or somewhere where you start saying, I want to tell this story. I want to come back to this. And this is something that like, boom, resonated and stuck with me.
My first project ever out of school was called Rock Fresh. And it was this feature documentary about 5 graffiti artists taking their subversive art and trying to jump to the mainstream. Not necessarily jump, but starting to be hired by these huge corporations and sort of the inherent tension that's there, but also it's kind of almost a little bit of a coming of age story of artists trying to make a living. And that again wasn't just premeditated. It was my buddy Coffee and some other guys. They were just doing some really cutting edge stuff. And I started to see this trend like GQ and Scion and Coca-Cola, and you were seeing South Park billboards that looked like straight throw ups. And so again, it wasn't premeditated. It was something that I was exposed to, and I was like, this deserves to be told. So a lot of what I do is that, but now a lot of projects will come. We're searching for projects, but it's not like the market's different now, right? You can't just tell these holistic stories as easy. I mean, if you've been following what's been going on, the strikes, the pandemic, and the consolidation has really took a number. And as a result, it has narrowed the aperture for the kinds of commission projects you can do. So if you want to go the long route, which I have a couple projects like that, you can do that. But I was wide-eyed, and back then, I think I was like 23 making it, and I just made it myself. I taught myself I didn't taught myself how to shoot.
Yeah.
That's why it looks like a student film.
Yeah, but again, back to this whole conversation of like zero expectations, the love of the game, the love of it.
For sure.
Right. And again, I think the thing that works for you and why you're 20 plus years into this and then some is just that root and foundation of where you come from. Not necessarily the place, but what you love and your passion and how you've been able to take that around the world with yourself. I want to go back to something. I want to go back to being a second generation Korean American. I want to go back to you talking about, you were one of the only ones there. And so I want to talk about you, the responsibility you see as a filmmaker. I want to talk about your experience as a Korean man. Like, what do you see with that, and what time have you spent in Korea?
I first went to Korea through my craft, actually. Um, it was 2008. I applied to the Korean Film Council Filmmaker Lab. It's like a Sundance lab with the government in Korea. And yeah, my craft took me to Korea, my motherland, for the first time in my life. I'd never gone with my parents or family. Our families, if you're Korean and watching this, you probably have experienced a level of dysfunction in your family. I don't know what it is about our parents' generation, but there's this concept called Han, in Korea, which is guilt, regret, resentment, pain, all the things. It's just gravitas. It's heavy. It's a chip on your shoulder. It's a burden. And I don't know, man. My parents' generation just they got it. And so we never had much connection back to the motherland, especially when my father died right out of college. So, right before I made Rock Fresh, my dad's death sort of pushed me out on the ledge because it made me realize, oh, I don't have any safety net at all. Because my mom had been a homemaker for the last previous 15 years, raising four children. So, in a lot of ways, my dad's death was probably the biggest, most formative turning point in my life. But yeah, it took me to Korea for the first time in '08, and it was mind blowing.
Let's talk about that for a second. I love this conversation of your parents who are immigrants, you never going there as a family, but knowing that you have this connection to it and saying, you know what, I'm going to apply for this, going, winning, and having that mind blowing experience that who knows, years later, it still comes back full circle with the family. When you think about that now and kind of like in this story, what Travel with Meaning is like, how much of that impacted your life, your career?
I don't know if it impacted my career. I think I just feel a lot of gratitude that I was able to use my career
Hmm.
to see my homeland. Because the Korean diaspora, Koreans of all the Asian ethnicities tend to assimilate the most, and I credit that to the Korean War and the American presence in South Korea. That's why I believe that Squid Game and K-pop and all these things translate to mass culture because there's an alignment with the American DNA. So that's just a side note. But
Huh.
yeah, a lot of young people my generation are so disconnected from their homeland.
What do you think is your most meaningful trip? Again, the impact of your life, your career, but just that you think about when you hear that phrase and that term. What do you think really had that for you?
I can say most recently there was a moment where I was even just in Chicago and listening to these artists named like there's a filmmaker named Andre Muir and my buddy Joey Perp and Vic Mensa. They're part of the Save Money crew, which is like Chance the Rapper's crew in Chicago. So it's just a beautiful collective of artists. They formed this collective called the Andre Theater Collective, where they're producing plays from incarcerated playwrights. And the one they're producing right now is called The Story of Violence. And we covered that in our Chicago episode. And I'm just listening to this. I'm like, man, that's powerful. You're talking about these men who are incarcerated who know they did something wrong and are trying to process why they're in this cycle of violence.
Hmm.
And it's written by incarcerated playwrights. And we're sitting there in a casting session. And you'll see in the Chicago episode. And the way the episode resolves, it's pretty powerful. So I'd highly recommend watching it. And that was a moment recently. I'm like, man, not only is it a privilege to tell this, but what it's so crazy about Chicago is what we unpack in the episode is the violence stems from this tit for tat revenge that just keeps happening that dates back decades and people don't even know how it began. And it's so we really take some time to really examine black violence in Chicago.
Hmm.
And that doesn't define Chicago. Let me just be clear. That doesn't define it. And nor is violence in the black community one and the same. It's just this specific problem. And we really get into it.
I think also one thing I just want to make sure to point out, and when people look at your body of work, and again, it's only the first 20 here because we know you have a long career ahead of you, is you have a variety of subjects and stories that you tell, but also that have so many layers to them and have such, interesting storylines on so many components that really feed your soul and your curiosity, as we keep talking about, that I really respect and love. And that's something I've always loved about you when I see you as the artist. That's to me just super inspiring.
I appreciate you and that so much, man, because I'm trying to do good work that means something.
Mhm.
And sometimes some of it feels overlooked because it may not have a celebrity in it, or it's not on this and that platform or whatever. So, but I always try to stay true to my roots, which are doing things that can inspire and move culture, but also entertain,
Mm.
move you. Like that's my main thing. I want to move you, whether it's laugh, cry, whatever. I want to move you. And if you're neutral, then I've failed.
I love that. I like you, that really resonates with me. As I like to say, part of why I started telling travel stories is twofold. One is I want to find those things that move, touch, and inspire. Those things that maybe you haven't thought about that when you go back that really had that impact on you. But also for myself, and something you've mentioned is curiosity. And there's an Einstein quote of, I have very little talent, I'm only passionately curious. And I know for myself that like I'm not athletic, I can't cook, I'm not a musician, but I like to hear people's stories as that through line, much like you like telling these stories. And so I see such a beautiful kind of flow within that for you and us. And maybe there's, no mistake that we grew up a block or two from each other.
Yeah.
So I love that.
We got to do more.
Yeah. Your wife is Colombian
Hmm.
and you've spent some time in Colombia with her.
I have.
Tell me about that.
It's, like, again, it's one of those places where most people will kind of go to the tropes of Pablo Escobar and is the cocaine good out there? And don't ever say that to a Colombian. Just by the way, don't ever say that because it offends them. They're not a monolith, and cocaine doesn't define them.
Mm.
In fact, just a beautiful people with a very distinctive accent that at least I can tell now, than an Argentinian accent or a Mexican accent. But yeah, I've been 3 times. I've been to Bogota, I've been to Cartagena, and I've been to Pasto, and that's where my wife is from. So to get there, Pasto is the equivalent of like Biloxi, Mississippi. It's deep south. It's on the border of Ecuador, and you gotta, it's from LA. It's 3 flights. It's not terrible. You go to Bogota, but you have to fly Avianca, which I hope they're not a sponsor because they suck. Fucking worst. The worst airline. And a Colombian will tell you that. And but I remember first time I went to Pasto was during Christmas, and her mom's and dad's family. It's like the mother's side is like they're kind of almost like aristocratic, and the dad's side they're just like all farmers. And I go to the dad's family, and man, I walk in this room and all these just Colombian eyes just peering at me, and I had to break out my Spanish 3 from high school, and it kind of worked. It came back to me, just figuring out word by like jigsaw puzzle. Like I am, me llamo Danny, and it just like, but it worked. And but when your back's to the wall, you really should. I couldn't think of speaking English. I had to speak Spanish. I had to show respect for the people. I love my Latinos. I've always been attracted to the culture. Some of my best friends are Latino. My wife's, my sons are half. So what a detour that was.
Yeah.
But Colombia's dope.
Yeah. Why did you bring up the Colombia thing? Because I think, again, it kind of just steps off this. It's not always work that we do, right? We live. It doesn't mean you're not looking to tell stories or living a story. And so I wanted you at least share that kind of side for us. Then let me ask you this question. What does travel mean to you?
For me, travel is everything. It's important because it is the bridge to other people. It's the bridge to humanity. You're not going to learn much if you're just chilling in your same 10-mile radius. And I'm a hungry learner. I feel like I'm a sponge. I I I enjoy osmosis. One of my most favorite things to do is on an off day working, when I'm alone. just put on my AirPods, listen to some music, and walk alone in the city. That's the best shit ever. Best. So it's a bridge to humanity, and it comes back to people. I really appreciate people.
I'm sure our travelers have heard me say this quote many times. It's from The Wizard of Oz, but it's not where you go, but who you meet along the way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think very much it's these people, right? The places amplify the experience, but it's the people that are really just interwoven in this tapestry of life in these chapters, who we are.
Most definitely. But there's nothing also like just being somewhere that's so foreign and majestic.
Mm-hmm.
Like, whoa, like where am I?
Gratitude for sure for those moments.
Yeah,
I love that.
Even going to Hawaii, like driving up to the North Shore and those majestic mountains, and you're like, God damn, this is dope.
Yeah,
So
I love it.
I like the vibes.
Danny Lee, storyteller, filmmaker, just all around passionately creative, incredible person.
Appreciate
Honored and privileged just to like really connect with you, my friend. It's been way too long that we got to see each other in real life. We're going to do this before we wrap up. We're going to play a speed round of questions.
Oh, shit.
All right?
Okay.
We're going to put 60 seconds on the clock, starting now. What is your current country count?
25?
Place you still want to visit?
Bali.
Place you tell people to visit?
Thailand.
Window or aisle?
Window.
Mountains or beach?
Beach.
Airbnb or hotel?
Airbnb.
Boat or train?
Boat.
Kindle, hard copy?
Hard copy.
Sunrise, sunset?
Sunset.
Air Max, Chuck Taylors?
Air Max.
Street art, fine art?
Street art.
Do you collect anything from your travels?
Things for my kids. I'll get them like little tchotchkes and things.
The thing you need on a flight?
AirPods.
Best travel lesson?
Make sure you have TSA.
Favorite national park?
Yosemite.
Favorite airline?
Singapore.
Favorite hotel?
That's the peninsula. I mean, the one I stayed in Thailand was pretty nice.
Favorite food?
Korean.
Favorite place in the world?
Los Angeles.
Yeah, buddy.
Mm-hmm.
Danny Lee. Tell the good people where they can find you on the interwebs.
You could find me on www.dannyleeworks.com. DANNYLEE works.com.
Shout out the company as well.
And the company name is Calico, all caps, www.calico.la. And I didn't do LA just because I'm like so proud of LA. It's because that's all those Oracle has, calico.com.
Listen, Danny Lee, it is an absolute pleasure and honor to reconnect with you. But at the same time, I'm cheering you on here as a fan of your work, but as someone who's known you since you were 14, 15 years old.
By the way, can I just say that Mikey was the cool senior? Like we were, when we got to school, we were all rocking like Fresh Job and Clobber, and we were just this little crew, and all these big ass kids were just seniors were just picking on us, and Mikey was this just glimmer of hope. He was like, "I'll be cool with you guys." So you were always the nice senior, you and Forrest.
Yeah, I will take that. Appreciate you, dude. Thank you again.
Thank you.
And we'll see you all very soon on the open road. Peace.